Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Jeff Charlotte, a professor of English at Dartmouth College and a contributing writer to the New York Times Magazine and Esquire, and the best-selling author or editor of 6 books of literary journalism, including The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power, and C Street, The Fundamentalist Threat to American Democracy. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jeff Charlotte.
Hi, Ian. Good to be with you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And what do you make of the appearance in an orange jumpsuit today of Maria Butina in a federal court in Washington, D.C.? She's considered a flight risk. She's being held in jail. She's being charged essentially with being a Russian spy and illegally operating as a foreign agent in this country. She apparently infiltrated or tried to infiltrate the highest levels of the NRA, but also the prayer breakfast, the secretive group that run that, the fellowship, or as you've written about, the family. So why are the Russians interested in the family?
Quite simply, it's the quickest and most efficient backdoor to American power. The family, unlike other Christian right groups that sort of lobby for access to Washington power, the family is comprised of and dedicated to insiders. It's not for the folks out in the heartland expressing their values. It's senators, congressmen, military leaders, business leaders. And so if you are looking for influence in Washington, there is possibly no better religious channel than this organization.
Well, in the 17-page affidavit released on Monday by the DOJ, outlining their charges against Maria Butina, it references her dealings with organizers of the National Prayer Breakfast, and also the fact that they have, this conservative Christian organization, have been sending conservative Christian congressmen on multiple trips to Eastern European countries friendly with Russia. She apparently attended at least 2 of these prayer breakfasts, and even invited Vladimir Putin to one in February of 2017. He didn't say no, but he didn't show up.
Well, it goes deeper than that. She attended more than 2, but she also attends the Moscow Prayer Breakfast, which is a direct offshoot of the National Prayer Breakfast. Was founded in 1992 by Doug Burleigh, who's the current leader of the family, the National Prayer Breakfast organizer. And in fact, that's where she first met the unidentified person number 2, or at least we know that the first meeting that we know of with the unidentified person number 2 in the affidavit. So this relationship with this organization goes much deeper both ways. I think what's notable is that we're concentrating on Russians infiltrating this organization, and that to me presents a more innocent, naive reading of what the family is. It's worth noting that they are reaching out to her too. Not only does she attend their events in Moscow, but they actually travel to Moscow to meet with her and her handler, Alexander Torshin, widely believed to be the unnamed Russian official in the affidavit, and a man who's banned from the U.S. They go to meet them, they work with them, they promise them seats. They arranged for the largest ever Russian delegation at the 2017 prayer breakfast. I don't think they're in the dark about what those people want. Even members of the Russian delegation anonymously later tell reporters, we're not here to pray. We're here to do work, for access, to do politics.
Well, she's not exactly an exemplar of Christian values herself, is she? She's a 29-year-old alleged Russian spy. She's living with a 56-year-old Republican activist who she disdains and complains about. Yep. And tries to seduce, I guess it's members of the NRA, I think, that she was trying to get a high-level job with them.
Sure, and this is what we know of. I mean, it's not a spy scandal without sex, and you almost sort of think that maybe she's been watching too many episodes of The Americans and thinking, oh, I guess this is how you do it. But yeah, and I think that that's really representative of when these groups, like the family or like the Russian government, if you want to call that a group, speak of family values, what they're really talking about is a political tool. They're not talking about something most of them personally subscribe to or even care about that much. The bottom line is power. You know, a friend was asking me, looking at this affidavit, says, I don't get it. Is the Christian right, American Christian right, attracted to Putin because of his anti-LGBT politics, or is it because of anti-Islam? And I would say both and neither, that what it is his pro-authoritarianism. And that's really the attraction. And that's at the heart of the theology of the family, and which distinguishes them a little bit from other Christian right groups, is that they openly identify their theology is about being one of strength and modeling Jesus. They say you could understand Jesus through looking at strong men in history. They name crazy figures like Hitler and Lenin and Mao and Pol Pot, not because they're Nazis or much less communists, but because they model strength. So Putin is a ready-made figure for them.
And of course, Putin has brought back the Russian Orthodox Church, and essentially Russia has returned to Tsar Nicholas I's triumvirate of orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationalism.
Well, what's fascinating about that is that Putin uses the Russian Orthodox Church much like Trump uses evangelicalism. Neither of them is really a personally devout man. No one suspects that. Both have a transactional relationship. And, I've attended Trump rallies where you get the crowd and they're roaring because of some really right-wing preacher opening things up with a rip-roaring sermon. And I'm talking to people, no, none of these people are churchgoers, but they love this kind of red, bloody, nationalistic religion. Same in Russia. Not very many people attend church in Russia. They love this idea of a Russian Orthodox Church. They love religion as a sort of a blunt instrument of nationalism. And, again, that's sort of, you almost wonder why Russia had to resort to spies to reach out to the American Christian right, when the American Christian right is, especially groups like Family, which have been cultivating Russian relationships for a long time, has been sort of just begging them, saying, come here, let's be friends, use us. We are your channel into United States power.
Let's then talk more about the ties between America's religious right and Russia's religious right, and the role of the fellowship, the family. They've sponsored 37 trips abroad of members of Congress in the last 18 years, and 14 of those trips have been by Representative Robert Aldersholt, a Republican of Alaska, who's the co-chair of the 2016 National Prayer Breakfast.
Alabama, I believe, actually.
Oh, Alabama. Sorry, yeah, Alabama. You're right. Yeah. So what's the agenda? Why was he going to those, particularly those Eastern European countries?
Well, the agenda of the family has always been, for decades, their idea is that Christianity made a mistake for 2,000 years by focusing on everyday people, the regular folks, the poor, and that they believed that they received a message from God. I mean, very literally a message from God telling them that their focus was to be the up and out, that the way you brought about the kingdom of God was not through converting the masses, but by converting the leaders and bringing them into obedience. So in their documents, they refer to the slow work of building a network of 200 world leaders bound through the family, through the back channel of the family, into this kingdom building mission. They've always concentrated, especially on smaller nations to begin with. So their work, they've been deeply invested in places like Romania and Albania, and bigger nations like Ukraine that have weaker governments, because they can have tremendous outsized influence. We may not be familiar with a congressman like Bob Adderholt, but a representative, just one congressman showing up in a country like Romania is very significant. You mentioned that there's 36 trips and 14 by Adderholt. I should clarify, that's what we know that's on the congressional record. There's quite a bit more than that. Those are the trips that are sponsored by them. There's a number of interlocking 501c3s, and so to really track it down, it's this sort of endless work of finding, they'll create little 501c3s that exist for nothing but sending one congressman to Sri Lanka to talk about an arms deal and Jesus one time. So the travel is really much more extensive, as is the Russia work. The Russia work, which is sort of where they're moving into the heart of a big power. They've established regular prayer cells in the Duma, which is the Russian parliament. And more interestingly, about 30 years ago, or close to 30 years ago, they started bringing up a group of young, promising men and cultivating them. Those men have gone on to become promising business leaders, and they now meet in a regular businessmen's prayer breakfast. So from their perspective, Russia is the prize of all this sort of travel among the smaller Eastern European countries.
Well, if they're only going after the elites, Russia will be the perfect target because it's run by a handful of oligarchs regulated by the capo di capo, Vladimir Putin. And
exactly, and that's their idea of how a government should be run. So you've got to remember that they don't believe in democracy. They were founded in 1935 with the explicit rejection of democracy. I've traveled with family politicians like Sam Brownback, who's now Trump's ambassador for international religious freedom. Brownback, who was then a senator from Kansas, said, I wasn't elected. I don't represent the U.S. people. I don't represent the people of Kansas. I have one constituent, Jesus. Senator Jim Inhofe, who's current senator from Oklahoma, expresses the same. He's traveled all over Africa, and he says, when I go there, I represent the Jesus thing, as taught to me by the family. He doesn't represent the United States.
Yeah, but that's not the Jesus in the Bible, though. This is the amazing. How do they get around the fact
that... It is a really unorthodox interpretation of Jesus. There's a little parable that the leader leader for many decades was a man named Doug Coe. He died last year, but in a pro-Trump book, a bestseller during the campaign, explaining why evangelicals should support Trump, had a little parable from Doug Coe about just such figures. He says, look, you can go and you can minister to the sheep, but that's a one-by-one kind of deal. You go to the wolves, and suddenly you're dealing in, because the wolves, scare the sheep, the wolves rule. Now you're dealing with power. And if you go to the leader of the pack, who was this figure that Coe called the Wolf King, and you say to him, if you bring Jesus alongside you, you'll even have more power. The Wolf King's going to cut a deal. The Wolf King's going to say that's a good deal. So this is crazy theology, but that's the theology that they use, for instance, to support Trump. How can you justify, as a Christian, supporting Trump? He's the Wolf King. And he's going to cut deals, just like Putin has. Putin doesn't care about his family values agenda, but Christians like it. Same with Trump. And the idea of building peace in these countries is bringing two strong men together, Putin and Trump together. Their idea, that summit that just happened, that's the family's idea of how international politics should work. Two strong men in a room alone. Secretly,
without notes. Perfect.
No need for notes. Jesus will keep the record. Their idea is God is using these figures, whether or not these men are devout or not. You couldn't really conceive of a theology that's more self-serving for power. It sort of is, what God wants apparently is whatever Trump wants or whatever Putin wants, and not a whole lot of scriptural consultation is required.
Well,
that's also what makes it really easy for someone like Maria Butina to walk right into this. She can start cultivating. If she had gone to some more traditional Christian right organizations, they would expect her to have some scriptural knowledge. The National Prayer Breakfast, Jesus is a gloss over power. You don't really need to talk faith. You need to talk access. You need to talk big names. And that's exactly what we see in the affidavit. We see her discussing with them which senior Putin advisors are we going to bring to the National Prayer Breakfast? Where are we going to put them? And remember in the affidavit she talks about thanking the prayer breakfast organizers for that very special private meeting that followed. That's the work that they're doing together.
Well, Jeff Charlotte, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Jeff Charlotte, who's a professor of English at Dartmouth College and a contributing writer to the New York Times Magazine and Esquire, and he's a best-selling author of 6 books and books of literary journalism, including The Family, The Secret Fundamentalism at the Heart of American Power, and C Street, The Fundamentalist Threat to American Democracy. We're going to take a brief station break and back talking how Europe has just fined Google $5.1 billion